and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm coming to you from the meat company in Dubai, and I'm here for an entrepreneurial story with a difference. It's the story of Sunil Lalvani, a man who grew up in the corporate world, doing all the corporate things, who eventually decided to throw his business acumen into getting water to millions in Africa who need it. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Just describe yourself up top. I mean, what sort of an entrepreneur are you?
I'd say I'm an unashamed capitalist. Grown up in a family business all my life, understood that capitalism really drives the world forward. And my journey along the way suddenly took me to realize that with all the social problems in the world, capitalism can be a fantastic tool to address some of these.
Now, how you got to this point of running a company that tries to get water to the millions in Africa, it's quite a story, and it begins a long, long time ago in the family firm, Binatone. A lot of people of our age will know that name, which was founded by your father in Wembley in North London back in 1958, an electronics company. You made all kinds of things from TV games to clock radios, I recall. Now, you grew up in that business. Just tell me a bit of that background, and then we'll go into how it led you into what you're doing now.
Okay, so I as you mentioned, born and brought up in North London. I had a very, very small geographic pocket where I was born from. The hospital I was born into, the house I went to, lived in, the school I went to the university was all within a 5-mile radius. And my destiny was always to join the family business. And 2 years before I graduated university in 1989, actually, it was my father and my uncle who had started the business, but they divided the business geographically at that time. And our side of the business, outside of the family, ended up taking what we called the emerging markets at that time, which was India, Africa, Eastern Europe, and parts of Asia. So all my life, destined to work in the UK office in Wembley, was suddenly thrown out the window, and my small geographical world was suddenly expanded. And I found myself living for a couple of years in Lagos in Nigeria, spent a significant amount of Hong Kong and China, and then eventually opened and ran our office in Russia for 8 years. Stayed there, built the business until 2002, when my wife and I decided we should move to Dubai, basically because our kids were small and that was probably going to be a better place to work from.
And the turn in your life came about as you were driving along one day on a road through Ghana. Just tell us exactly what happened there.
That's right. So after my stint of running Russia, I took over the group business, and then I spent a lot more time in Africa. And indeed, on one of my journeys within Ghana, driving along a bush road, as I've done many a time, but on this particular journey, my driver just suddenly stopped in the middle of nowhere. I looked up and looked around and thought, middle of nowhere, I asked the driver, what's going on? And he said, well, there's a puddle of water in the road, so I can't carry on. We're in a 4x4. I said, well, it's just a puddle of water, drive through it. And I remember it so vividly because it was so nonchalantly how he said, I can't drive through it because there's a couple of kids in the water. Now, him being a Ghanaian guy, this was, I assume, quite normal to him, but being brought up in North London, to me, water comes out of a tap. So asking him what are the kids doing in the water, he said, well, they're collecting water. You know, they'll get that, they'll move out of the way, and I'll drive on. But I said, yeah, hang on, that's not normal to me. I need to understand what's going on. So I actually got down, I spoke to these kids, and they indicated to me that they lived about 100 meters up the road, and they were on their way for their daily 30 or 40-minute commute to get the water. And their comment was, luckily it had rained last night, and they could collect this water just 100 meters away. And it sticks with me so strongly because the day that I would consider it lucky that was the water I could drink is going to be a horrific day. So it was a shocking moment for me.
I mean, how did you feel at that moment? You have these two vulnerable children there collecting water because it's all they could do at that particular time. What did it make you feel inside?
It was really conflicting, actually, because on one hand, you know, the day you and I, God forbid, are going to have to drink that water is the day we've hit an all-time low. But these kids were quite happy. They were in there playing and joking with each other and drinking the water and collecting the water. Because as I said, this for them was fortuitous. They'd saved themselves, an hour and a half of walking. So I actually wanted to understand more of this. So I actually walked up to the village with them, spoke to some of the elders, and tried to understand, what is this really the normal life? Is this your everyday occurrence? And in fact found that that village had a hand pump that had been installed by an NGO some years earlier. But as I now know is common across the continent, the hand pump had broken down and there was no mechanism or team to fix that. And at that moment I thought that's something I could probably do something about.
So a lot of people could have seen this. A lot of business people travel on on the African continent, see a lot of terrible things, and then they go back to the hotel, get on with their lives. What made it different for you?
I think it was probably that shock of just seeing it in front of me. And I was no stranger to the water crisis intellectually. I'd seen some documentaries on it, I'd read articles on it. But exactly as you said, if you switch off a TV, you close a magazine, look, the reality is it disappears in the typical mind. But this was too close to home to.
So what did you do next?
So I thought initially as maybe as a CSR project for Binatone, we could do something here. Quite honestly, the CSR initiatives we had until then were we'd write a check for a clinic or a school if someone knocked on our door, but it wasn't really a focused strategy to do something direct. So I thought, here's something I feel passionate about. Let's get on with this. And looking at the hand pump as the traditional solution, I identified 3 critical areas where it could be improved. One predominantly being the physical effort. That, this has to stop. How do we improve the physical effort? 2, how do we make the capacity greater? Because one single tap from a hand pump doesn't also serve a village very well. And 3, if we're going to do something, how do we ensure it's going to be sustainable and maintainable over a longer period of time, unlike the broken hand pumps? So within the business, we had a solar division. So I took 2 of my solar engineers and said, look, can we put a solar powered pump here that's going to take away all the manual effort? We can put multiple taps around it to make sure that the community can be served en masse, and put a mobile monitoring unit on it so that if anything happens to it, breaks down, we can know about it and we can send an engineer to fix that. So we developed that. March 22nd, 2015, March 22nd being World Water Day actually, was the day we turned on the tap of the first site, and I was just ecstatic that this was, from seeing those 2 kids in the water to seeing them turn on a tap and drink clean water out of a glass was very, very satisfying.
So how did you then go about raising money for a body that its full-time job is to try and get water to people in Africa? So
this was very interesting because I'd again also been just reading about social enterprises, about impact investment, and understanding that this is a good way forward. I want to be careful how I say this, but I'm very cautious about philanthropy and charities. They obviously serve a purpose in the world, but I think some of the models are outdated. As I said, I'm an unashamed capitalist, and I think money is a great motivator. The profit motive is a great motivator for people. So how do we put a business model around this? So actually, we wanted to build the sites. We charge a nominal amount for the water, which pays all the maintenance costs. So I thought, well, how can we wrap that up and raise some funding and brand this as a social enterprise? So in fact, I went out, was looking to raise some funds, spoke to a number of friends and family, and thought, would you like to invest in this venture? Got some very positive feedback on Project Maji itself. People saying, very noble cause, congratulating me on doing some good in the world. But most of them couldn't wrap their heads around this idea of, this is not investment, this should be a donation, this should be a charity. What do you mean invest in this? So it was very hard to get them to
because some people might look at you and say, oh, look, it's very good that you're giving water to poor people, but aren't you making money off it? Isn't this some form of exploitation?
Until today, this was at the time and is today something a lot of people ask. And to me, to make anything sustainable, you could give a one-time donation to charity. It's the old teach a man to fish example. You can give them one-time donation and what's going to happen, or you can build a sustainable model around this. Now, we charge in the village a price that is agreed by the village. We don't dictate the price. We make sure that it's agreed by the village. We also go into every village and do an affordability assessment beforehand. Now, I don't doubt that there are some villages that are so poor that charity is the answer. Charity does have its place in the world. But we go into villages where we make sure that there is an affordability level. And we do that actually very simply by measuring mobile phone penetration. because I take a very simple view. If someone is going to pay money for mobile phone airtime, they can pay for water. If that's where they are on Maslow's hierarchy, then I think water comes up slightly higher. So that's how we tried to go about it. So we overcame the challenge about, are we making money off people?
So how does the project work? Say if I invest, say $100 with you, how do I get it back, and when do I get it back?
So at the time it was going to be an 8-year investment, and we were projecting about a 15 to 20% return on the money. And then that proved to be the challenge on the other side, because when we moved from the friends and family to the so-called, what I say, so-called impact investors who wanted to put money behind this, the same commendations, what you're doing, great work, making a big impact, etc., but your financial returns aren't very interesting. And that's where I got extremely frustrated as well, because at least my definition of impact investing, in 99% of cases, if you're serving bottom of the pyramid people, I think you can make money, okay? I think you can look at them as consumers, not as charitable beneficiaries. But the big challenge I find is there needs to be a trade-off between social impact and financial return. So you can still make a capital back, you can still make a financial return, but it's not going to be, you're not investing in Uber or Airbnb, okay? You're investing in water in Africa. So make a compromised return. But these impact investors just weren't going to accept that, and that was a challenge.
Is there appetite for it? I mean, in many ways, it's the sort of thing that people should be investing in. One day we'll go to war over water if we don't do something. But I mean, what would you do, for instance, if, say, a foundation came and said, "Oh, there's $1 million. I'm not investing. I'm giving it to a charity." What would you say?
So, in fact, what we did was to aid the financial contributions that we could get. Was we in fact converted then Project Maji from a for-profit into a not-for-profit. That's in name, but we run it exactly the same way. Anyway, when it was a for-profit, after paying back investors the investment capital, all the profits were going to get plowed back in anyway. So the way we run it, and this is the key, because to me, any enterprise, for-profit, not-for-profit, needs to be run on core business principles. It needs to be run on watching your expenses, efficient operations, maximizing whatever revenue you're going to be getting in. So that's what we do. But now what we do is we take donations in that pays for the capital. The money we charge for the water pays for all the maintenance fees that goes on. And any surplus that we get obviously sits either as a reserve or to building fresh new sites.
So just a little bit more about yourself. I mean, you grew up in a family business, as we said in the first half. Your father founded it in 1958 in Wembley in London. It's not always that easy road to hoe, is it, when you get into family business? It's not for everyone. What was your experience?
I always tell people family businesses, when they're working and when things are going very well, they can be phenomenal things. They bring families together. The unity that you get within an organization is unbelievable. Obviously, the trust factor on working with partners who are blood relatives, by and large, is something you find very hard to get outside. And some of the challenges we've had, certainly, for example, when the financial crisis hit in 2008 and things like this, the things that go negatively with a family business is not things you can walk away from as well. When things are tough, and I mentioned I lived in Russia before. In 1998, went through a terrible financial crisis. You're not an employee that you can just walk away now from a business and go on to better climbs. So when things are tough, you've got to really fight it out and stick in there, and that's one of the hardest challenges with it. But in my time, I've been through at least 4 crises in my 25 years. But we've got through them all, and.
Often family business as well, I mean, there's this idea of succession and continuity, but I know it's not that simple sometimes. I mean, I've done stories on entrepreneurs in family businesses, and they say, well, the big problem is my children are just not interested. I'm sorry. What sort of problems did you have?
I think from my side, I think we were very lucky. It's my father who founded it with his brother, and then I have a brother as well. My father decided to take a view, which is quite un-Asian, I must say, from a family business perspective, to keep it just within the 3 of us in the family and not hire other family members. We weren't going to be just full of having cousins and other distant relatives coming in and joining and adding that HR complexity to things. So I think we were quite lucky that way, that my father had the foresight to keep it that way. But certainly other people I know in family business, actually very, very, very smart people and very successful businesses, seem to throw their business acumen out the window when it comes to the HR issues of handling family members. So I think that's something that's got to be very, very carefully handled.
Because also, sometimes there can be, you say this unity that you talk about, there can be emotions that other businesses would just throw by the way, but because it's family and it's blood, these emotions can be consuming.
Yes, I think another, this is perhaps one of the biggest challenges, is the emotional part, the family dynamic part, and being able to really compartmentalize what's family and what's business. My father is my father and my boss, and which hat gets worn at the same time. And if there wants to be a robust debate about a strategic decision or a product decision or something like that, which hat do I wear? Am I an obedient son or am I a vociferous employee? Balancing that kind of thing is also brings its challenges.
So getting back to your water business, how you said that the company had set up water distribution, selling water in villages in Africa. How many villages and how many people are we talking?
So currently we've just crossed 50, so 50,000 people we're serving. It took us about 4 years, and we had about 7 or 8 sites in the first 4 years. In the 5th year we went from 8 sites to more than 50 sites, and my goal is now to double and double and double and double, so 50 to 100, 100 to 200, 200 to 400, etc. We've got to reach 1 million people by 2025. I want to reach 10 million people by 2030. I know that's ambitious growth, and it's still only scratching the surface of the 800 million people who don't have water. And I think a lot of that is going to be dealt with by collaborative partnerships with other NGOs and other what are called small water enterprises like ourselves, who are tackling slightly different geographies and niches.
What about with governments? And I'm sure you've been in to see some of them on the continent, and I know a lot of the politicians I would know would say, oh, well, 50,000, that's nothing. So they wouldn't be interested. So, I mean, I don't know. How are you facing that barrier? We try and do a lot by ourselves. I'm not trying to rely on anyone, not trying to rely on other NGOs, not trying to rely on governments, but we of course welcome their support. So we are absolutely engaging the government of Ghana in this. We have done a couple of sites, pilot sites with them at the moment directly, so hopefully that should expand. But in the meantime, we need to just go on our own way. Governments, of course, are going to be a key. If we don't engage them, we're not going to be able to break through barriers, but it does take time across the continent. Funding issues by governments is an area, so as long as we can bring in private funding and grow ourselves, we'll wait for the government funding and government support to come and assist us in that. And in your view, obviously you study this, I mean, how much more with every passing year is this becoming something that everyone should be involved in? I mean, the climate's changing, water's getting more scarce. It's going to affect long-term stability of scores of African countries across the continent.
No, this is such a critical issue, and it does worry me about how actually underfunded it is at a global level. Forget the African governments, but at a global level, this is massively underfunded. Because apart from just a global security issue, because as you said, the next wars, forget oil, water is going to be the next area fought over without question. But it also dramatically impacts education and health. And women in the workplace, because as I said, I saw the 2 kids in the water. It's children not going to school who are collecting water. It's women not working going to collect water. If you can give them water, you're doubling the African workforce who now have time to work. You're immensely increasing the number of kids who go to school and get educated in the next generation of people who are going to be able to get jobs. So a huge amount more funding and focus needs to be put on this. And I have to raise the horrible word of corruption. I was at a conference in Stockholm a couple of weeks ago. The estimate is $32 trillion is needed to address the 17 SDGs that the UN has announced. My humble opinion, that is massively overestimated. We have a solution that goes into villages, looking at it from a commercial perspective. It costs us about $12,000 to install a site, turnkey, the village has water. The nearest competitor, if you like, costs $40,000 to $50,000, 4 to 5 times the price, and we're struggling to get contracts with that. The only reason someone's moving 4 to 5 times more is.
But there's another problem. I mean, you raised it yourself. I mean, corruption. I mean, what about if an unscrupulous person in one of the villages you're helping decides to double the price over water tonight with the interest of pocketing the difference? What can you do about it?
So that's a great question. So as we had early sites, it was always cash payments, and we empowered someone in the village, and we called them an entrepreneur to allow them to earn money as their salary to sell water. But controlling that as we scale up and as we have thousands of sites is going to be very hard to do. So actually, about 2 months ago, in fact, with the International Red Cross, we piloted a new site in Ghana, and we have an automated payment system. So it's cashless, and we can set the price remotely. So we can agree with the local community, set the price, and the entrepreneur who we set to manage the site in the village can only sell at the price that we set. So we control it that way. We also make sure that the money comes into us and no one absconds with that money and takes it.
You talked about the expansion of the project. Is it too much to dream that one day there'll be a listed company on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, say, that's supplying water or selling water to villages in Africa?
Whether it'll be a listed company or not, I'm not sure, but will there be a sizable entity that has tackled this problem and that is financially sustainable, throwing off cash surpluses, call it a profit or retained profit surplus? No, that's not too much to dream. That's absolutely my dream. Because as I said, 1 million people by 2025, 10 million by 2030, and then we carry on until every person in the world has water. So that's a sizable business with a critical product, and we'll get there.
Any time you think perhaps it's too much and you should pack it in?
Not at all. This journey is just beginning for me. You know, I spent 25 years in a family electronics business which I loved. Electronics, gadgets, products. That's my passion. Well, let me say it was my passion. But that's what I think has been so fascinating about it. So I've taken everything I knew. I knew about electronics. I knew about product development. I knew about manufacturing equipment in China. I knew about getting stuff into Africa and distributing it around. That's all stuff I've taken from the Benetton business and taken it to Project Maji and to help us expand. I had to learn a bit about the last mile execution. Okay, sure, we've got to learn something along the way. But this, apart from being such a rewarding journey for me from that humanitarian and moralistic point of view, it's been such a fascinating intellectual journey for me going on something new. So no, we're just starting.
And we're talking long term, we're talking decades into the future. We've spoken earlier in this half about family businesses and passing it on down the generations. You have children, need I say more?
So both my kids have come out and seen the work we're doing. I'd like to think that they're both proud of their dad for what's going on. But I've taken a very conscious view that I will open the avenues for them. I will explain to them what I'm doing. But it is entirely up to them what they want to do. My son is in Bristol University studying aero engineering. My daughter is doing international hospitality in the UK in university as well. If they come to me, knock on my door and say, hey, I'd love to work with you, my door is open, my arms are open, and I'd love it. If they choose a different direction, then good luck to them, and I'll bless them with that.
You're 50 years old now. How long are you prepared to devote the rest of your life to sort of driving around villages in Ghana, Zimbabwe, South Africa, wherever, doing this, trying to get water to the people?
Well, I guess what I just said, my kids in university, it's been a bit fortuitous timing for me. I guess I'm at the other end of the spectrum of the typical 25-year-old entrepreneur. My kids have gone. My wife will travel with me sometimes. She's actually born in Kenya, so she's familiar with the continent. So I have all the time in the world to be there now, and I love it. You know, there is nothing I enjoy more. You know, intellectual stimulation, rewarding work in this context. When you go out there and you can turn on a tap that you've built and help these people, and you see the smile on their faces, there is nothing more rewarding than being able to see that, and that will keep me going for a long time to come.
And I mean, how do you want people to think of you or remember you in years to come? You know, as a businessman, entrepreneur, or as a philanthropist?
It's a hard question to answer. Look, I would love to be remembered as a guy who made an impact and made a difference and made a real dent in the water crisis.
And also, just the people out there maybe watching, maybe interesting. I mean, this water entrepreneurial project's likely to go on and on in the future? You've given me targets for numbers. How do you want to see this company of yours grow?
So we're very much focused on drinking water in villages, as I said, and if I use the word, the consumer base is virtually unlimited, 800 million people. We are also now expanding and looking into agriculture and irrigation, because most of our beneficiaries in the villages are farmers, smallholder farmers, and they're also the future of the continent. So it's early days yet, but we're exploring that area. If we can expand our water provision into irrigation, that could be a whole new avenue that takes us in new directions.
Thank you very much indeed. We've been talking to Sunil Lalvani, entrepreneur, businessman who's now dedicating his skills to try to get water to the villages of Africa. That's all we've got time for on this edition of the Entrepreneurial Edge from the Meat Company in Dubai. From me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.